high spiritual attainment is, you might say, in the package that we are. The spiritual life includes compassionate action and virtue, penance, but also intense meditation, depth prayer. All of those things go together to disclose to each individual person on the golden rosary of human life, each individual person, okay, you're made like that. Wonder, awe, love. You are something really special, right? Why not let it bloom?
My guest today is Father Francis Tiso, a Catholic priest who has spent over 3 decades studying Tibetan Buddhism. His research asks what the rainbow body, a paranormal phenomenon reported among the most highly accomplished Tibetan Buddhist yogins, might reveal about the resurrection of Christ. We talk about that research, his recent 4-day retreat in total darkness, and what a lifetime spent between contemplative traditions has taught him about virtue and compassion. I hope you enjoyed the interview.
So, where are we going today?
Isn't that the ultimate question? Yes.
The ultimate question.
The ultimate question. Well, first, I just want to thank you for being willing to talk with me. You know, the podcast is a recent thing for me, and once I really made a decision to do it, you're one of the first person I reached out to, because your background and history, your approach to these kinds of questions.
There are some interesting combinations that have come together over the years that make what I'm trying to do seem a little bit unusual, although it shouldn't be that unusual. I don't think it ought to be unusual. People will tell me that they have a hard time talking about certain things with clergy or counselors or whatever, so they come knocking on my door, as it were, and it can be quite challenging at times, because we get people who have had many problems in life, but who have tried different spiritual methods for finding a way out of their blockages and addictions and traumas. So they come and they ask for support. It's not only an academic kind of thing. It's a spiritual network of spiritual interrelationships and guidance that I'm picking up on more and more.
That's happening now for you, that people reach out to you with these kinds of questions or dealing with these challenges and come to you in person, or they just reach out to you through your website or through the church community that you're involved with, or the parish?
It's interesting that the parish kind of runs itself. So that's not a big thing, although there are some people who send me WhatsApp messages. But it really comes by email. It really comes through email, or maybe through Messenger, or in rare cases through WhatsApp. People who have read the book, seen the interviews, and would like to share some ideas with me. I mean, the other day, for example, I had a fellow who had been dealing with addiction, and he was telling me about this Iboga. Do you know what Iboga is?
Mm-hmm.
This from West Africa. And of course, since I work with African migrants and Middle Eastern migrants, I thought I might have heard about this one, but the Africans tell me about something called bitter leaf. Bitter leaf is some kind of a bush that they gather, they dry, and make a tea with, and it's very good for influenza. But Iboga is a much heavier prospect. It has a powerful alkaloid complex, and it can help people with addiction, trauma. It also has some, I suppose, I don't know if we would call it hallucinogenic properties, but perhaps in certain dosage it might. And my pharmacist friend and advisor says, yeah, it's very powerful and not for everyone. But that was just one example. And we actually had a very beautiful conversation because he said, I can't even talk about this with anybody except other
Mm.
people who have tried it, right? But he wanted some theological feedback, some spiritual feedback on this. And also, I work with plants myself. So, it was really great to share methods and dosages and all that kind of thing. So that happens a couple of times a week, usually. We get people reaching out. And as I say, I think that's my job, you might say. In addition to helping migrants fill out their forms, get what is justly theirs, all of that, which I also do. And this week got all tangled up in. I've been away for 2 weeks. I think I may have mentioned to you, I went to Brother David Steindl-Rast's birthday event in Austria. He's 100 years old, and
Wow.
he's doing wonderfully well, really. And the events were really attracted a large group of people. I counted over 500 people for the conferences and debates and dialogues that were held. There was a beautiful mass on the feast of Saint Benedict, and then on the day after his birthday, there was a boat ride, but I had to miss that because then I went on to do this dark retreat in Germany, and that was an interesting experience also because once again it opens me up to working with people who have questions, who are searching, who are willing to try. Whether it's going to be entheogens or whether it's going to be dark retreat, to get in touch with, well, what's the purpose of my being here? What is the meaning of my life? What am I made out of? That kind of thing. So that was eye-opening for me in the sense that there I am in the dark for 4.5 days, giving an opportunity to reflect on many things in my own life and then open myself up to whatever graces God wanted to share with me in that experience. Because you can't tell God what to do, you know. God tells us what to do. We don't tell God what to do. You
Right.
can do a lot of, practices and improve your receptivity, but ultimately the source is there.
So many questions I could ask you just about that itself. I mean, just that, what you just described. Is this your first dark retreat, or is that something you've done before?
Well, it was the first time I actually did a formal dark retreat with a coach, and all that, in a place that was set up for the purpose. Actually, I have my bedroom set up for dark retreat so that every night I try to go into total darkness. And sometimes I will wake up and say prayers in the dark. And so it's not totally unfamiliar to me. But this was the first time I actually did it, continuously over several days.
Is there anything you feel comfortable sharing just about what that was like, what came? I mean, I'm sure a lot could have come up during that time, but just
Yeah.
just some kind of, yeah, the experience.
Well, in addition to the fact that I, could describe the first 2 days as a penitential and mm, kind of reflecting and repenting, remembering and trying to make peace with people in the past. So I think that also corresponds to the great emphasis in the Desert Fathers literature and in the Philokalia on penitence and a spirit of humility and repentance. So that was really happening. And then things started to open up with some dreams, which then my coach was encouraging me to look at more or less from a Jungian perspective, which was also useful. But then all along the way, and then increasingly as the days went on, there were these spontaneous light phenomena that take place. And these eventually became quite frequent with accompanying phenomena. But what was important here is that I was able to confirm for myself something that I already had suspected in my own contemplative practice and in my study of the Syriac Christian mystics. Okay, the people that almost the world has forgotten about completely, but who were incorporating into their practice of the monastic life the teachings of the Desert Fathers in Egypt. All right, so these are people in Central Asia, in the Middle East, who had learned from the Desert Fathers in Egypt, had sent emissaries actually to Egypt to learn the methods of prayer. They brought them back to places like Mesopotamia and Persia, and even what is now the Gulf Coast, which was Christian actually at the time. Qatar was a Christian city, so people there were practicing both monastic life and community, but also many, many hermitages. And they were having these experiences, and some of them wrote letters to one another or wrote homilies meant for their fellow monks, describing certain mystical phenomena, such as discs of light, such as a crystal surrounded by a golden light, this kind of thing, beautiful things that appear as the mind is becoming more and more pure and as we're coming more and more in communication with the inner life of God. All right, so now it's interesting. This is 7th, 8th century A.D., just before the development of what we call Dzogchen, or the Great Perfection System in Tibet, where some of the same phenomena are also described. All right, so this is in my book, Rainbow Body and Resurrection, but now on the basis of my own experience, I can see that probably the Syriac mystics were doing their practices as much as possible in the dark. All right, and they, and then they also were generous enough to share those experiences with one another in a reserved way through letters of encouragement to one another, which is very beautiful, actually. So I think I could confirm what I was seeing in the writings that have come down to us. And then, and there were some other things that were interesting too, related to my research on the rainbow body, the resurrection, the Shroud of Turin, and so forth, that seemed to confirm intuitions that I'd expressed in writing. All right, now, granted, we know our writings may persuade ourselves. All right, but certainly some of the things that I saw were very vivid, and so indicated that it, not only for me, but for other people making a journey, there is something there to be explored, and that it's worthwhile.
So tell us a little bit about. I want to rewind just a tad. So rich. You mentioned in your book that your relationship with Brother David Steindl-Rast is part of what prompted you to conduct that research. Can you just describe some of the history of your relationship and then how that relationship prompted or facilitated or supported you in moving in that direction with the research on rainbow body and resurrection?
Yeah, some of this is described actually in the opening chapters of the book, but basically it was interesting to go to the 100th birthday party and sit down one night after all the hubbub was over. And it was about 10 o'clock at night, and Brother David and I had a little snack together before going to bed. We were in the little monastery where he lives and is taken care of very well. And I said to him, who would have thought 57 years ago that we'd end up here tonight having this food together and just being together as old friends, And that was really a beautiful moment, because actually I didn't want to overload him with questions and observations and stories about my life that he hasn't heard yet, or all that. I really wanted to just be in his presence and enjoy that quiet moment of friendship, which was a point on a very long trajectory going back to 1969, when I first met him, and then when he gave these wonderful teachings on the Benedictine life and also on Zen back in 1970. with his friends Swami Satchidananda, who was a disciple of the great Shivananda, and Rabbi Joseph Gelberman, who was a Hasidic rabbi from Brooklyn, New York, actually from Eastern Europe, but who was running a synagogue in Brooklyn, and then Father Dan Berrigan, the Jesuit who was later arrested for destroying the draft files in Catonsville, Maryland. All right, so a very important anti-war activist who only passed away a few years ago. So these people were giving us teachings, and I really, at that time, was so drawn to Brother David. He represented something to me that I wanted to realize in my life. I wanted to do that kind of a life. All right, and so over the years, a few years later, I ended up becoming his assistant for about 2 years. And we co-authored a number of papers and articles and attended dialogues. And then as the years went on, we stayed in touch. And let's see. Yeah, well, in the late 90s, it's when his Zen teacher friend from Switzerland, Vanja Palmers, told him about the dissolution of the body of Khenpo Acha in eastern Tibet. And Vanja Palmers, who was working in Zurich, in Switzerland at the time, knew a Tibetan doctor who was working also in Zurich, who knew where this place was and knew about the event. So this is right after the summer of 1998. So Brother David very quickly picked up on it and saw it as an opportunity to examine the possibility that there is an inherent dimension, let's say, of the human body-mind complex that, once properly cultivated, can bring about remarkable phenomena at the time of death, up to and including what we call the resurrection. Okay, so because he was having a dialogue with the Jesus Seminar, right, who were the people who were applying kind of humanistic and empirical data to interpret New Testament text, to ascertain whether certain sayings of Jesus really were attributable to Jesus, or whether they had evolved over the decades after the life of Jesus by the community as they discussed and shared their faith. You know, there are many different ways that the New Testament became the New Testament, you know. And so, but they had a hard time at the resurrection, and so Brother David wanted some more evidence that might at least open up a conversation. Now, I will say this, that, all right, I went to Tibet, I did the research, I struggled a lot with the material I was collecting, because I really didn't know how to put it all together into a believable narrative that would be acceptable and respectful of the Nyingma and Bonpo traditions in Tibet, but also of New Testament scholarship, Christian theology, but also the methods of anthropology and hermeneutical research. Okay, so I had a lot of things to settle in my mind before I could publish that book. So I did the research in 2000, and it continued well into 2004, and I didn't publish a book until 2016. And I think that was wise, because I picked up on a number of things, especially from the Syriac Christian mystics in the Middle East, that helped me understand that they had some experiences that were very similar to the experiences reported by the Dzogchen teachers who come just after the flourishing of the Syriac mystics, 7th, 8th century, Dzogchen coming into its first primordial, shall we say, its pristine form in the late 8th, early 9th century in Tibet. So I thought there was something there. There was a narrative beginning to shape up. And so the book is that narrative. So Brother David had the idea of restoring, refreshing, and advancing a dialogue with the New Testament scholar community, right? So did we succeed? All right. Well, a couple of years ago, an Italian scholar said to me, I would really like to have a dialogue with you and write a book together about this. And I said to him, we have to talk about the shroud. And he says, I can't talk about the shroud. So I said, I don't want to do the project. And that was the end of that. But a scholar at Princeton, who's a well-known New Testament scholar, Dale Allison Jr., has now written a very fine book on the resurrection and has been willing to look at the shroud. He's been willing to look at the rainbow body. He has a whole chapter there on the rainbow body. So it means that we've broken through the barriers, and this research has become more persuasive to the people that Brother David originally wanted to address. And I'll say also in Europe, we have a 35-page review in French by Philippe Cornu, who is one of the leading French language Buddhist scholars, right, teaches at Louvain, and there too, the book is taken very seriously, and I actually was invited to reply to the review at Louvain a couple of years ago, so that it means that my teacher's intentions through these efforts are being fulfilled, which brings me a great deal of happiness. I would say more happiness even than all the events up in Austria, or except for two, the Mass of St. Benedict and the Evening of Poetry by Rilke, which was sung by a brilliant young British tenor. And everybody in the room was like floating. It was such a beautiful experience. But those two moments I will treasure forever. Some of the other moments were a little harder to deal with, especially because my German isn't really that good. So I was improvising as I took notes. But anyway, that was that. So you get an idea that feeling that through that friendship over those decades with Brother David, we actually achieved something that was close to his heart.
Can you share more about the shroud, just the importance, some of the history for those people that haven't read your book or haven't read about the shroud in more depth?
All right, the Shroud of Turin is a relic attributed to the medieval period, 13th or 14th century. On it is depicted in a mysterious way, not easy to analyze, the body of a dead man. But you see that it was folded over the head of the dead man. So the continuity of the cloth goes from the front with the feet all the way up the length of the body, and then flips over and you get the back of the body. So when you stretch out the cloth, it's double the height of a man. Okay? And if you look at this cloth, just as it is, and it was interesting that at Brother David's, there was a kind of a display in one of the public buildings in the town near his monastery. And on the wall in the corridor was a photograph, a life-size photograph of the shroud. Now, anyone could go up and look at that photo and say, I can kind of make out hands, I can kind of make out a face, a few other things. But it really looks like little brown, beige, and gray splotches on a piece of cloth. Now, why that I think is very important to think about is that it shows that no artist of the 13th or 14th century would ever have dreamed of making a painting out of little splotches of brown, gray, and beige, right, of the body of Christ. He would have painted, the whole body with colors and flesh tones and maybe the blood stains and all of that. But nobody would have done a painting like that in the Middle Ages, okay? And we know that the shroud existed well before the 13th century from evidence in various parts of the Middle East. But in 1898, an Italian photographer decided to take a photograph of the shroud using the old-fashioned glass plate method, with the gel and the silver, compound in there. And he came up with a negative. And when he looked at the negative, he was blown away because there, all of the dark patches look light and all the light patches look dark. So you actually see a face all right, that is looking at you from a dark background, and it's really awesome, right? And it doesn't look like anything a medieval painter would do, not even an icon painter in the Byzantine world, although we know that the Byzantine artists must have known the face of Jesus on the shroud, because there are certain details that they did incorporate that are found only on the shroud. So anyway, tons of research has been done. To sum it up very briefly and somewhat prejudiciously, um, although a carbon-14 dating was made back in 1987, and they came up with a date around the early 1300s, we now know that the piece of cloth that was examined had been handled by many people over many centuries, and so the fabric was impregnated with the grease from our fingers. So the carbon-14 dating was contaminated by the presence of subsequent bacterial and other organic material on the cloth. So as a result, scientists have now been willing to admit that that attempt at dating the shroud was a mistake, and we have to look at other things. And there are many, many other things to look at, such as optical effects, which are not easily explained simply as a cloth on a face that suddenly got brilliantly hot and burned the surface of the cloth. It's not as simple as that. And so there is evidence of movement. There is evidence of displacement, all right? And there are many, many other things that could be said, but at least to put it this way, mountains and mountains of papers have been published on the Shroud of Turin from any number of perspectives, and my inclination, as is Brother David, is to take it as probably authentic. Take it as probably authentic and a really remarkable relic, which was made by, as one researcher put it, a burst of conscious light. This, however, also differentiates the shroud from the phenomena described for Khenpo Acha, which took place over an 8-day period under a cloth. There is no image on the cloth. There is no residue of any kind on the cloth. All right. It took a longer period of time. There was a burst of light outside the hermitage. That is true. And there were many rainbows and other phenomena described around the hermitage. But the burst, the intensity, and the burning of a cloth did not happen. And in fact, in our subsequent interviews, none of the rainbow body manifestations ever left a mark on cloth. All right. The Buddhists do know about masters who, will put their hands in a rock, or will deliberately leave a footprint on a painting, so that you will always remember them by their footprint, things like that. But that's not burned on. That's done with ink. They'll step on ink and then they'll step on the painting. So this is really pretty unique. And it maybe suggests that whatever Jesus realized in his resurrection may have taken up some of the same biology and physics of the human body that the Tibetans discovered, but did it in a way that was different, definitely different from the way the rainbow body is attained. But in any case, I still think it's all pointing to something that is inside all of us. One line of research is biophotons, which are the little bursts of energy about the intensity of a single electron. All right, so photons are extremely tiny, but they're in your cells, and there are billions of cells, right? So you've got billions of these little bursts of light coming out of the nucleus and having something to do with protein synthesis in all the cells. All right, so there's biophotons. There is research now on meditation practices that occasionally give rise to light phenomena. And then there is this dark retreat. And the dark retreat, some people refer to DMT, that substance in the brain cells, Some other people have told me they have doubts about whether it's really DMT that causes the dark retreat visions. But whatever it is, you're getting phenomena. Now, I'll have to disclose a few things about my own practice, but whether I'm doing a Dzogchen practice or a Christian practice, I do get light phenomena when I'm meditating or praying. But in the dark retreat, the phenomena were different. In some cases, there was a similarity, but not really, I think, the same chemical process, all right, inside me. So I, of course, naturally, I would like to explore this further, and I understand that Ian Gardner's group that are creating now centers for dark retreat intend to do, first person interview, analysis of data, accounts of experiences, and telemetry to try to find out more scientifically about what happens in dark retreat. And of course, I'm really hoping that some of my other friends will be interested in biophotons. I've been encouraging some of my Mind and Life Europe researchers to pick up on that thread. So we want to find out more. Anyway, this is a wonderful area of research here, I think, to find out more about how this body-mind complex really works.
Truly fascinating. Yes. Yes. Can you say a little more? It sounds like you were describing a distinction between the experience of not in dark retreat of luminosity that occurs for you when you're in prayer or practice. And then you're saying that in dark retreat, there's a different, you kind of thinking it's a different system or there's a different quality to it. And I wonder if you could just illuminate that a little bit.
I know it's very tantalizing, and of course, I'm taking a risk because I'm only a few days away from the retreat, and there's a lot of processing I need to do. But fortunately, I had a good coach, and we did a lot of debriefing, and that's all on tape. So the first person account is, right there from the event. So what I'm going to say now is this: we know from our scholarship of Tibetan practices. All right. If you know Ian Baker's book on Tibetan yoga, there are a number of other studies that are very thorough on the different kinds of yoga and meditation practiced in Tibet. Now, they like to make distinctions, all right, and are very critical, all right, as you probably know, right? Who is on this side? Who is on that side? Does this practice lead to full Buddhahood or just part way? It's, this kind of thing. So they think critically about these things almost to excess. But it is very clear, especially in my second chapter in the Rainbow Body book, that there is a Nyingma Buddhist approach to the rainbow body, all right, that is quite definitely different from the approach to, let's say, a body of light or an illusory body in the Kagyupa and Gelugpa Six Yogas of Naropa system, all right? So I just gave a paper in Assisi to a bunch of astonished people who had never heard any of this stuff about the Six Yogas of Naropa and how it fits into a path leading to holiness, leading to realization and Buddhahood. Because it was a conversation about saints, and well, how do you get to be a saint? So, but the Six Yogas of Naropa definitely produces a certain kind of result, a certain kind of person. Even when we read the biographies of the great Kagyu masters, we know that each one is a personality, one different from the other, and yet they have this inner realization which connects like the beads on a rosary, and that's what they call their biography collections, a rosary, a golden rosary of biographies, all right, to tell us that they're all connected even though they're all different, all right? So let me try to be specific as I can. Let's just take the heat yoga, all right? I know the heat yoga from the Six Yogas of Naropa. It's the first of the six. It's what Milarepa is famous for. It's what Alexandra David Neal and others have found so fascinating, this whole business of drying wet sheets on your back in the cold winter night, because you had this amazing ability. I have a lot of doubts about that whole procedure, even though I know it's been filmed and so on and so forth. But after all, if you've ever been on a cold night and you manage to warm up your body in some way or other, you're going to start sweating, and the sweat is not going to help evaporating a wet sheet. All right, so there's something here that doesn't hold water. But what does hold water, and what everybody seems to neglect, because we're always attracted by the spectacular, is that you can raise your body temperature a couple of degrees. All right, I would say 2 or 3 degrees Celsius, which is almost 4 degrees Fahrenheit. All right, that has been documented. But more important than that is that you can move the energy fluxes in your body toward what they call the central channel, right, which runs from the top of your head down to the crotch. And you move those energies into that central channel, and you do get, at a certain point, a kind of a silent click, and you start to see spheres of light, okay, colored light. And I started to have these experiences about, 25, 26 years ago, and I was in dialogue with Ani Tenzin Palmo, who is now called a Jetsunma, the foundress of a wonderful community of nuns in northern India. But she was a British woman who became a Tibetan Buddhist nun and did 12 years of retreat. So when I wanted guidance, of course, I would go to her. And she was a friend of mine, and she lived here in Italy for a while. And we worked together on some of the phenomena that I was experiencing. And of course, she was very helpful. But as the years went on, that light became more and more coherent, all right, more sphere-like. A sphere of purple light with a corona of gold, all right, things like that. When I did a retreat with the Bonpos in Mustan in 2019, the whole thing became absolutely clear because they gave a great deal of importance to the heat yoga as a turning point in the system, right, which they had incorporated into the practices that prepare a yogi for the higher practices of Dzogchen. So here they've taken the Kagyu system, you might say, the Buddhist tantric system, and incorporated it into the the Bonpo sequence called the A Tree text. All right, the practice of the letter A is what it means, and you're working with that letter A, but you're working on it in many different kinds of yoga practice. Let's put it that way. So to make matters very simple, what I experienced doing heat yoga in that context was quite specific and confirmed everything that I knew from my Kagyu studies. Okay. Now, I have not yet received from the Bonpos or the Buddhists authorization to do what are called the Togal practices that lead to these visionary experiences. So going into dark retreat was, of course, a leap in the dark, literally, because I had my Christian practices. I had devised a preparatory set of practices for me as a Christian practitioner involving psalms, rosary, Jesus prayer, things that I had memorized, and practices that I know from the various sources that I studied for decades, right? But I didn't have the full. I know something about Togal, of course, and I know about Togal visions and what they look like. And with Geshe Sonam Gurung, I had translated a very difficult text a couple of years ago in Kathmandu that describes some of the phenomena in retreat. Okay, so I knew all this stuff. It's not that I was totally, but I didn't have the full-fledged authorization. Anyway, you get in there, and for one thing, have you ever done a dark retreat yourself?
I have not. It's on the list.
It's on the list.
So
Okay. Well,
read about it, heard about it. Yeah, have not actually participated. Yeah.
all right. Well, then let me. This was something that I didn't know what it was, and I thought there was something going wrong. Basically, in the dark, you start getting flashes of light, and a very quick, vibratory phenomenon in the eyes. Okay, it's like strobe lighting. Bum, 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 bum. So I would press the three acupuncture points above at the eyebrows, and breathe out, relax. And that would calm this down because it was annoying, and I didn't know what it was. So when I told the coach about this, he said, "Oh no, you're not supposed to stop it. You're supposed to let it happen, because that is the signal that the DMT or whatever the chemical is starting to kick in." All right. So that was interesting. At least I learned that much. Not totally stupid, right? And when I did allow it to go, to happen, then that's when you get other visions like the spheres of light, swaths of light, landscapes, mysterious forms, and then also some other wonderful images like people appearing and asking for a blessing, or various things that happen. So, including, I must say, I saw the man of the shroud, but as a cosmic reality. That was really beautiful, and that came through a number of times as the phenomena increased in cycles as the final days went on. So that is very different from the kind of light that I was experiencing from the Six Yogas practice. So now we can see a difference from a first person perspective between one set of practices and another. Okay? So now, of course, we need to sit down with some experts in Togal and figure out what's going on, right? But in any case, from a scientific point of view, I think we can say that from an reasonably adequate, informed first person account, these are two distinguishable phenomena that may also at some point be in contact. There may be some convergence there too, but that needs further work. Okay, obviously I'm not the only person doing this. There are other people who have done many days of 49-day retreats in the dark and stuff like that. So those folks also, we need to hear their first person accounts. And of course, many of these people have been committed to practice for many decades. And so they too could probably provide some accurate critical assessments of what's going on. Okay. But I think it's a rule of thumb that what you practice, all right, does condition the outcome. All right. That's a truism. All right, so if you're doing practices in a particular lineage and you do it properly, you will obtain the outcome, right, the phala, the fruit of the practice, of the sadhana. Okay, and that's sadhana is the word that describes what you do in a period of practice, the procedures that are followed, the relationship with the lineage that is developed, and then sadhana produces siddhis, all right, the results. Okay, and then the person who has attained siddhi is a siddha. Okay, one who has attained the objective of the practice undertaken. All right. This is very important because in India and Tibet, these things are taken quite seriously. Hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Well, it's gosh, Father, the part of me that it thinks categorically, I'm sure I'm not the first person that this has happened to when they're talking to you, but the part of me that thinks categorically that, okay, here's a Catholic priest that I'm talking to, and he's talking about something like Togal. He's talking about dark retreat. He's talking about, tummo. And there's just something that you're able to hold in these different traditions that I don't know how to even give language to that. Mm-hmm. I don't have a word for it right now. I mean, because I was planning to ask you about interreligious dialogue. That almost seems like that word doesn't even seem. That's sort of a frail. It's a frail conceptual framework to describe what you were just talking about. There's so much beyond dichotomy, like this way that you embody that through your process. And I mean, it's just something that I just think so much about the polemics that are happening in this day's world. And you're someone who, I mean, you've managed to work something out around that for yourself, and you have your own way of doing it, it sounds like, and you've had your own lineage and different traditions and different teachers. I wonder if you could just speak to that. I know that's not really a fully formed question, but there's something there that I just really want to acknowledge in you and just give room for.
Yeah, of course, when I began exploring Vajrayana, not only as a scholar, but also in terms of practice, I received permission. Of course, Brother David was already at my side, but there was Father Mayul de Drie, who was a very great French lion of a monk, who was at my side. He was my confessor at the time and said I should do this. And he had himself explored India, Thailand, Madagascar. He had been in other cultures for many years. And then he ended up as the one of the officers of the Benedictine Subiaco congregation in Rome. So he had the highest esteem of the Roman authorities. This is a very distinguished person. And then the other was Abbot Tonini, who was the abbot general of the Sylvestrian Benedictines, who have monasteries in Sri Lanka. And he too knew South Asia quite well. And he too was at my side. And let us not forget June of 1992, when I managed to get, to my own surprise, tickets number 1 and 2 in the Great Audience Hall in the Vatican, when the Pope has the big Wednesday audience. And I figured I'd be seated way in the back, and there I am down in front. And the Pope, John Paul II, now Saint John Paul II, is going around the crowd and, greeting everybody and all of that. So I figured, oh, this is going to go on forever. And by the time he gets to the front row, he'll just shake hands and say, have a nice day. But no, Pope John Paul II came down there. Next to me was a young Tibetan monk from Pokhara in Nepal, and who was in charge of the training of the young monks. He was with me as a guest, and myself in my cassock, and didn't have white hair at the time. And the Pope listened to what we were saying. He asked me, "What are you doing, and what is this dialogue?" and so on. I explained who the young monk was, and he says, "You must continue this dialogue with the Buddhists." And he pointed his finger at my heart, stabbing away. All right. So this is St. John Paul II, and at the height of his powers, all right, saying that, and making a very strong point. And I have a beautiful photograph of that moment. So, with those people backing me, I think, I have a good blessing, let's say, to do what I do. All right. And it enables me to talk about not only interreligious dialogue, which I've written about and done and all of that, but also to talk about the dialogue of religious experience on the level of experience and not just of theory. Okay. And that's very, very important because you see, it's not only that you know the techniques and you've done them, that's not even halfway there. It's the kind of person you become because you have done those practices. Any of us who have ever interviewed or even spent time with some of the really great Buddhist masters, you know that they're very special people. They're quirky and sometimes funny and sometimes irritable, but they can also be very, very great human beings, and they come across that way. Holiness Dalai Lama is a great example. But I remember back in 1997 interviewing many of the great Kagyu teachers in the Bodhanath area of Kathmandu for my research project that year. And my late friend, Serenity Young, came with me. And Serenity was the kind of scholar, she was a very talented writer, and she was doing her research on her laptop in her hotel room. And I said to her, Serenity, get out of the hotel room. Come and meet these people. Let's try to find out the quality of their lives. How do they live? How do they receive us? What do they say when they see us? You should be curious about this, Serenity. And so she came along. And later on, she wrote that, in fact, I was the person who dragged her out of the hotel room and made her look at the lived experience of Buddhists and Hindus, people of the Himalayas, and getting the feel of it by actually being in the middle of it, which is exactly what we were taught at Columbia anyway, by people like Ted Riccardi, who taught Himalayan anthropology, and we have the stacks and stacks of photocopies that he gave us, and he did that kind of work. He had the linguistic skills, and he showed us how to be participant observers. Okay, so naturally, now when we're talking about participant observers, we get a little bit of a handle on the question you're trying to formulate, which is that I am a participant observer of my own faith and also the faith and practice of others, and really limitlessly. I've been told on a number of occasions in synagogues that, well, Father Francis, you certainly know more Hebrew than the average Jew. Where they're singing, on Shabbat. And I don't know Hebrew at all, but I can sound out the letters. So they think I'm very talented. But when we're talking about Sanskrit or Tibetan, I've actually studied those languages, and I can read the text. I can sing along with the lamas. That's okay. So there is now a book about to come out called Discerning Stirrings. And that book is an account of my own spiritual development through the Christian, mainly Catholic tradition, right? Chapter after chapter, but bringing in illustrations of things I've learned from other traditions, okay? So in that book, you begin to see the fruits of a dialogue of spiritual experience, which does not neglect the great masters of our own tradition, all right? So speaking about holding in a dynamic way for our moment in history these great lineages and living them, practicing them, handing them on, reflecting on them with people who are also committed. Right? And so that's the style. That's the way I do it.
Say the name of that book one more time.
Discerning Stirrings. The term comes from the title of a very short 5 or 6 page text from medieval English written by the anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing. And so he calls it, discerning of, or discernment of stirrings. That is how to determine whether we should or should not be doing certain practices, whether we're just attracted to a certain kind of practice, or we want to show off with our practices, that kind of thing. So the little text is very, very good, and I have a commentary on that text in the book. But I thought that title actually covered the whole book, because we are always, dealing with desires in our heart to know, to experience, to enter more deeply, to make the journey, to contend with ourselves and with others. So Discerning Stirrings seemed to be a good title for the book. It's going to come out, I understand, sometime in August. It's probably early in August, close to even maybe in a couple of weeks. So I'm thrilled about that. It's En Route Books. And so they're available online. I'm pretty sure he's sold on Amazon. And he's got the printing capacity to print books digitally in 23 countries, all right, around the world. So this is going to make it much more available.
Here I did schedule this interview with you, and I didn't even know you had the new book coming out. So
Yeah.
that's wonderful. I'll make sure that I put that in. I'll give a link to that in the description.
Cool.
There are so many questions that I could ask. So it just feels like endless, really endless, the amount of questions that I could ask you. Are there areas where you feel personally conflicted as you're applying practices from a tradition that's outside of your home base? Your faith orientation.
Yeah. All right. Well, naturally, one will notice differences. Okay. So you have to, of course, leave space for those differences. I mean, the Christian tradition is very concerned with the human person, very concerned with God who becomes a human being, whom we encounter in kind of a mystery of divine grace. All right. This is something that the Hindus know a lot about, but the Buddhists do not consider this typically all that important. All right, although they have ways of saying the same thing too. But basically, the importance of a figure like Jesus for us is so central, and then the fact that we understand Jesus through four gospels, but also through 2,000 years of people becoming saints, in relationship to Jesus, right? In different, in incredibly diverse ways. Today we have Saint Bridget of Sweden, who was one kind of a person. Yesterday we had Mary Magdalene, who was a completely other kind of person, and so there are all these saints, like in the Kagyu golden rosaries, right? There's a connecting thread, but that connecting thread allows for individual differences that are sometimes quite dramatic. But it's that encounter with Christ. So I like to call this the great parabola. All right, it's not like everybody is on the curve of the parabola, but it's more like each individual person within the universe of the divine light, the divine grace, comes through this descent, the encounter with Christ that switches things around like a gravitational pull, almost like a comet, coming in and then sweeping around the sun. And so we sweep around the sun to go back to that infinity from which we come. All right, even just now I was working on a homily for this Sunday, and when it says, this I'm going to translate from the Italian, so be patient with me. Because those whom he has from the beginning forever known, right? Those who have been known from the beginning, these he has also predestined to be just like the word in Greek is isomorphico, all right? So it's the same form, all right, as the image of his son, so that he will be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters, right? This is really a very powerful verse in the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, that great 8th chapter of Romans, all right? So what is Paul saying? We have always been known by God, right? And the encounter with Christ makes us understand how is that the moment has come to turn things around. All right, thanks to that encounter with Christ, and to become with Christ, sons and daughters of God in this great parabola, right? That comes from infinity, goes back to infinity, passes through the gravitational power of Christ's love, Christ's grace, Christ's reconciliation. I mean, this is such a key passage for interpreting St. Paul, So when I put that alongside something like the great Asanga, right, who was the great theorist of the Yogacara school in the 4th century, he's working out how you can have the unity of Buddhist experience, non-dualism, all right, consciousness only, and all of that, but recognizing the multiplicity of Buddha kayas, Buddha bodies, right? So you have Dharmakaya, Nirmanakaya, Sambhogakaya, Swabhavika. Well, how does he work that out? Well, if you actually read Asanga on those topics, you see that he's struggling with the same issues that the fathers of the church in the 4th century, only a few miles to the west, were working on in places like Nicaea, Chalcedon, Ephesus, and Alexandria, and so on. All right, so the theme of multiplicity within radical metaphysical unity is there throughout the Indo-Mediterranean culture, right? So we notice the convergences. We also notice the difference in tone, the difference in way of presenting, the difference of pedagogy, right? But we also notice time after time again, some of the things seem to converge even when the metaphysical perspective is radically different. Buddhism actually rejects the notion of substance, right? It rejects the idea of a metaphysical substrate, all right, underlying the phenomena that appear. All right, for Buddhism, it's sufficient that causes and conditions continually cause phenomena to arise, to appear, to consciousness. All right, consciousness itself is reducible to this continuous flow of causes and conditions, which we call emptiness, right, in Nagarjuna's way of talking. But if you really dig, and keep digging in Buddhist thought, there are many times when you realize that what we mean in Christian metaphysics by being or even substance is really actually defined in ways that are quite close to what the Buddhists would call emptiness or nothingness. Okay, it's not that far apart as one might think. All right, even during dark retreat, Alexander, my coach, was saying this darkness is kind of like Buddhist emptiness, isn't it? And in a way, it is, because in a certain sense, everything is there, in like microparticles, right? Everything is there, but everything is there in a radically open way. So there is something to that, and since our Syriac mystics, at least, seems to have gotten into caves and meditated in very dark places and got their flashes of light, maybe they understood this too. And certainly when we read about someone like Isaac of Nineveh, who seems to have had a real love of people who disagreed with him, who were disagreeable, and who were outright sinners. I mean, he had space for everybody, because he had this degree of realization, which is very similar to what we see in the great Buddhist masters. So time after time after time, differences of metaphysics, differences of practice, even the whole business of, there was one participant who became quite red in the face when I displayed the naked Vajrayogini dancing on the cover of someone's book, and then the even more erotic image of the Chakrasamvara Heruka deity embracing the Dorje Pakmo deity in sexual union. That was also red in the face moment. All right, so those things, no Christian would depict God that way. However, we do have something called bridal mysticism, in which the experience of mystical union is understood as being somewhat analogous to, embodied as erotic love. All right, the famous statue of Saint Teresa at the Transverberation by Bernini seems to suggest that there's an embodied quality to mystical ecstasy. All right, so we do know about these things. All right, but again, it's just presented in a different way and with different values and presuppositions. There are people, I could really go on all night about this one, but even in these very, very technical tantric texts that I've been working on from the Kagyu lineage for quite a few years now, there's a word digpa in Tibetan, which could be translated sin. But the typical Buddhist translator doesn't want to do that because it has resonances with the Christian idea of sin. And they will tell you, well, sin is a transgression against the law of God, and digpa has nothing to do with the law of God. But you can't translate it with any other word, and the description of how to purify it, which is repeated over and over and over again in these tantric texts, seems to indicate that the early Kagyu yogis were very much aware of guilt, of the possibility of committing evil acts, and the need to purify those acts. All right, so it's all there. You just have to, be willing to sit down and talk with somebody who's actually doing the practice, and not just sit there with the dictionary trying to translate.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Jeez, that's it's just remarkable. The way that you're going deeply. It's like going deeply into one area in one of these areas of study. Then all of a sudden we can start to connect. It's like going through one side of a wormhole or something like that, and then all of a sudden we can see this connect, or you can see this connection, and in different ways. I just think that's so fascinating.
The wormhole image is a very good one. It's as if
Yeah.
we really are, like Thomas Merton said, we really are already one, right? But you have to go through the wormhole of a lot of struggle and personal suffering and doubt and all kinds of other things to get through the wormhole. But then you do, all right? And then you go, ah, ah, wow.
So one last question here. Both of these the varying traditions, I know that Christianity isn't one thing, Catholicism isn't one thing, Buddhism isn't one thing. Each of these traditions most broadly emphasize compassion, and each admonish us to embody compassion. And I wonder if you can speak just a little bit about what these traditions have to offer us, what they can tell us about us. I know it could be a big question, but just in general, how might each of these traditions point us towards embodying that?
Yeah, one of the things that the tradition, certainly the Tibetan tantric traditions, and especially Dzogchen, is that they always incorporate, usually toward the beginning of the journey, a study of Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life, which is a great treatise on compassion. All right, and in many different dimensions. So there you see that even these highly technical, and in some respects even somewhat, I wouldn't say intellectual, but refined, all right, sort of removed and refined, and highly austere systems are grounded by the spirit of compassion, embodying compassion, being compassionate to others, being like Isaac of Nineveh, leaving space even for people who are a pain in the neck, etc., etc. So compassion is an important teaching. Another thing that I'm discovering more and more as I continue my studies, I always liked the six paramitas, the six transcendental virtues of Mahayana Buddhism, and I'm finding that indeed that is more central than we may have thought to the emergence of what we call Vajrayana. Everyone is always talking about dharanis. And dharanis are magical formulas like mantras that are somewhat long, and they come at the end of a sutra, and you use them for somewhat magical purposes. But it really seems to me that it's the paramitas that open up the conversation about transcending, all right, our ordinary ways of thinking, even about virtuous action, so that our virtuous action becomes more authentic and leads to full enlightenment. All right, so that I mean, there's a text called the Surangama Samadhi Sutra, which is one of the great Mahayana sutras, the heroic journey, right, towards a samadhi attained while making a heroic journey, right, that kind of thing, right. So it's kind of samadhi in motion, right, and that samadhi in motion text has a fantastic section on the six paramitas. So all of these things open up for us a reflection on virtue, the neglected middle term, because we all have penance, and purification, and we all want to get to mystical union, ecstasy, and samadhi and higher states. But nobody wants to talk about that middle element, which is virtue, paramitas, the virtues, the what we call the theological virtues, and the four classical virtues, right? So, but looking at virtue as a constant challenge to us to go beyond being mere intellectuals or mere yogis, who know all the techniques but wouldn't even know what to say to a person who comes with a dead child in their hands, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
remember that the Buddha had to do that, and many saints have had to do that. So if you have worked on that middle term, your heart is open for when that person who is in tears comes to your doorstep, and that seems to be so crucial, right? Because at that point, all of your technology, all of your theology, all of the theories and so on, either stand or fall. Either stand or fall. They either brought you to that moment and made you conscious, right, or they became an obstacle and you kept the door closed. See, so it's something that should be reflected on by every tradition and every practitioner. Because I've noticed during retreats, sometimes people will wish I hadn't started in on that. They will, but little by little, they start to get the joke, to get the point, and it's interesting. And when are we going to get to talk about emptiness? When are we going to do formless meditation? When are we going to have open awareness contemplation? What's all this business about? But really, all this business is very much about getting to samadhi. All right, really, very, very definitely so, and being heroic.
Right.
In Christianity, we talk about heroic virtue. All right, and that's exactly the theme of the Surangama Samadhi Sutra: heroic virtue in action.
That's right. It seems like you're pointing to a difference in what I would call chasing a state versus what a transformation actually consists of, how that actually becomes um, the ground for the behavior of someone or how someone shows up with others. So it's a really powerful distinction.
And how needed it is right now, in a world where you
Yeah.
have the world aflame with wars and people promoting hatred and thinking that they're being virtuous by promoting hatred. It's really pretty amazing. So all the more, we need to reinforce the virtuous life and support people who have intuited, right, that that's the way to go, but are a little bit shaken by the state of the world at the present time. We talk a lot about resilience, all right, and I think that's what we mean.
Well, thank you for naming that. I just see you as a beacon of light in that direction. That your life demonstrates a way to be in that, to be in the, could we say, even a middle ground, middle way of traditions, and not having to somehow defend something through violence or to generate some sense of superiority or
all the things that can happen, I think, unfortunately. So thank you for bringing our attention to that.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to share before just closing up the interview?
Yeah, balancing out the emphasis on virtue and compassion. All right. There's also the fact that these higher states of realization open up for human beings, all right, an inherent capacity. All right. That text from St. Paul, all right, really, really is pointing the finger right at that. All right. That if we come, we were always known by God. And then in first chapter of Ephesians, before the world began, we were known in Christ. All right, right from the very beginning, known and loved. All right, so the point being here that high spiritual attainment is, you might say, in the package that we are. All right, that's what we are. And it's so that the spiritual life, which includes compassionate action and virtue, penance, and also service of others, but also intense meditation, depth prayer, that kind of thing. All of those things go together to disclose to each individual person on the golden rosary of human life, right? Each individual person, okay, you're made like that. Wonder, awe, love. You are something really special, all right? Why not let it bloom? Why not let it bloom? Let each one of those little gold beads on the rosary turn into a flower that's alive. That's alive. And that's, I think, Brother David's message with the gratitude theme. It's certainly what I've discovered in meditating scripture and encountering others over and over again. That there is this great and beautiful mystery of the divine within us, making us, like he says, of the same form as Christ Jesus. Right? Fantastic. Yeah, it's just fantastic. And we do it together. We do it together, right? So that's why it's worth it to have this kind of conversation and not just have the thoughts.
Right. Yeah, it's there's nothing to keep to ourselves in that sense. Can't keep it. So thank you so much. What a beautiful statement. It just was really moving to me. I could feel just land in my heart.
Thank you, Scott. Many blessings to you and everyone who's listening to you.